you guys. Alrighty, so when we left off in chapter 15, we had Lewis writing a letter to Sam. While he's staying in the Ritz-Carlton, right? Okay, so we're on chapter 16, Philadelphia. Lewis worked all the last week of September for the Swan boatman in the Boston Public Garden. He was a great success and was becoming famous. On Saturday, the boatmen paid him $100 in cash, which Lewis placed carefully in his money bag. The boatman, after paying the first night's bill at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, decided to let Lewis sleep on the lake instead of in the hotel, as this suited Lewis better. He slept with the ducks and the geese on the lake, floating gracefully on the surface of the water, his head tucked under his wing. Lewis took great care of the trumpet. He kept it polished, and once a week he cleaned the spit out of it. He learned new songs whenever he could by listening to people's radios and by attending concerts. He was very good at remembering the music he had heard. He was really a natural-born musician, or in this case, a natural-hatched musician. One song he liked was Beautiful Dreamer, Wake Unto Me. Whenever he played it, he thought of Serena, and always when he finished it, the passengers on the Swan boat clapped loudly and cheered. Lewis liked applause. It made him feel lighthearted and gay. Sometimes at the end of the afternoon, Lewis played Now the Day is Over. He made it sound sweet and sad. One afternoon, when he was leading the last trip of the day, he played the Cradle Song by Brahms. The passengers sang the words, lullaby and good night, with roses bedight. A boy in the front seat of the boat pulled out an air rifle from under his jacket and began shooting BB shots at Lewis's trumpet. Whenever the shot hit the horn, it made a pinging sound. So the cradle song sounded something like this. Lullaby, ping, and good night, ping, with roses bedight, ping. The children on the boat roared with laughter when they heard this, but the grown-up passengers were angry. One of them seized the boy's rifle. Another went home that night and wrote a letter to the Boston Globe urging stronger gun control laws. On some afternoons at the end of the day, people gathered on the shores of the lake to listen when Lewis played taps. It was a peaceful scene, a memorable hour. The Swan boat had never enjoyed such popularity or made such a lot of money for the owner. But Lewis knew that boats would not run all winter. In a few days, the boats would be hauled out for the season to wait quietly for the arrival of spring. One day, when Lewis was waiting for the boat to take its passengers aboard, a Western Union messenger boy appeared on a bicycle. "I have a telegram for the Swan," he said. The boatman seemed surprised, but he took the telegram and handed it to Lewis, who opened it promptly. It was from a man in Philadelphia. The message read, "Can offer you $500 a week for nightclub spot, 10-week engagement. Please reply." Signed, Abe Lucky Lucas, Hotel Nemo. Lewis did some quick figuring. $500 a week for 10 weeks? That was $5,000. $5,000 would easily pay his father's debt at the music store. He took his slate and wrote, "Offer accepted. Arrive tomorrow. Meet at Bird Lake in the zoo. Splashdown will be at 4:52 p.m. Hope this will be a convenient time for you." Lewis showed the message to the Western Union boy, who copied it on a telegraph blank. "Send it collect," wrote Lewis. The messenger nodded. "That means send it so that the person who receives it has to pay for it." That's what collect means. The messenger nodded and rode away. Lewis stepped back into the water. The boat's lines were cast off and Lewis led the way. He knew it was his last appearance with the Swan boat, and he felt a little sad. It was a warm, quiet Sunday afternoon, the last Sunday in September. Lewis played all his favorite tunes. Lazy River, Beautiful Dreamer, Oh Ever in the Greening Spring, Now the Day is Over. And then, as the boat neared the dock, he raised his trumpet and blew taps. The last note echoed from the walls of the Ritz and lingered over the public garden. It was a sad farewell. For the people of Boston, it meant the end of summer. For the boatman, it meant the end of the best week of business he had ever had. For Lewis, it meant the end of another chapter in his adventurous life, out in the big world, trying to earn enough money to get his father and himself out of trouble. Lewis slept peacefully that night, being very careful that his money bag was safe. Next day, he flew to Philadelphia to keep his appointment with Mr. Lucas, the man who had sent the telegram. Lewis had no trouble finding Philadelphia. Almost anybody can find Philadelphia who tries. Lewis simply rose into the air with all of his things around his neck. And when he was about 1,000 feet high, he followed the railroad tracks to Providence, New London, New Haven, Bridgeport, Stamford, Coscob, Greenwich, Port Chester, Rye, Mamaroneck, New Rochelle, Pelham, Mount Vernon, and the Bronx. When he saw the Empire State Building, he veered off to the right, crossed the Hudson River, and followed the railroad tracks to Newark and Trenton and points south. At 4:30, he reached the Schuylkill River. Just beyond, he spied the Philadelphia Zoo. Bird Lake looked very attractive from the air. It was crowded with waterfowl of all kinds, ducks and geese mostly. Lewis thought he also saw 2 or 3 swans. He circled, picked an open spot, and exactly at 4:52 he splashed down. His trumpet banged against his slate knocked against his metal rapped against the chalk pencil, and his chalk pencil on its string wound itself around his money bag. All in all, the splashdown caused quite a commotion. The ducks and geese were not expecting anything like this to happen. A big white trumpet or swan dropping down from the sky loaded with personal possessions. Lewis paid no attention to the other birds. He had a date to keep. He saw a man leaning on the wall railing in front of the birdhouse. The man was dressed in a purple suit and wore a Tyrolean hat. His face looked shrewd and wise, as though he knew great things, many of them not worth knowing. That must be Abe Lucky Lucas, thought Lewis. He swam quickly over. "Caho," he said through his trumpet. "My pleasure," replied Mr. Lucas. "You are right on time. The splashdown was sensational. Welcome to the Philadelphia Zoo, which crawls with rare mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fishes, including sharks, rays, and other fish-like vertebrates. Watch out for wild animals. This place is replete with them. Snakes, zebras, monkeys, elephants, lions, tigers, wolves, foxes, bears, hippos, rhinos, woodchucks, skunks, hawks, and owls. I seldom come here. My work confines me to the throbbing heart of the city, among the money changers. I am under great pressure from my work. How was your trip from Boston?" I think it's funny he says he doesn't come there very often when he can list 20 animals right off the top of his head that live there. "How was your trip?" "Smooth," wrote Lewis on his slate. "I made good time. What about my job?" "A happy question," replied Mr. Lucas. "The job will start on October 15th. The contract has been finalized. Your place of employment is a nightclub of great renown across the river, a place of high fashion and low prices, a jumpy joint. You will be called upon to make appearances each evening except Sunday and play your trumpet for the happy customers. Once in a while, you can join a jazz group. Louis the Swan on trumpet. The pay is very good. My spirits are lifted by thinking about the pay. Wealth and happiness are around the corner for Louis the Swan and Lucky Lucas, the great of heart. My agent's fee is 10%, a mere bagatelle. How do I get to the nightclub? Asked Louis, who only understood about half of what Mr. Lucas was saying. In a taxi cab, replied Mr. Lucas. Be at the north entrance of the zoo, Girard Avenue, at 34th Street at 9 o'clock in the evening on October 15th, a night that will live in memory. A cab will await your pleasure and will transport you to the club. The driver is a friend of mine. He, too, is under pressure from his work. Who's going to pay for the cab? Asked Louis on his slate. I am, replied Mr. Lucas. Lucky Lucas, the generous of heart, pays for the cab of Louis the Swan. And, by the way, I see that you are wearing a money bag that is plump with moolah. I suggest, from the kindness of my great heart, that you turn this money bag over to me for safekeeping during your stay in Philadelphia, a place of many thieves and pickpockets. No, thank you, wrote Louis. Will keep my money bag myself. Very well, said Mr. Lucas. And now there is one other small matter I must bring to your attention. Most of the birds that can swim on this luxury lagoon have undergone surgery. Candor compels me to tell you, that means being truthful with him and completely honest, compels me to tell you that the tip of one wing is usually removed by the management. A painless operation, popular in zoos the world over. Pinioned is the word for it, I believe. It detains the water bird and prevents him from leaving the narrow confines of this public park and rising into the air. Because when one wing is shorter than the other, the balance of the bird is upset. His attempt to take off would be crowned with failure. In short, he can't fly. Sensing an advance of revulsion you would feel towards having the tip of one of your powerful wings removed, I approached the man in charge of birds and laid before him a proposition. He has agreed not to clip your wing. It is arranged. He is a man of honor. Your freedom of movement is assured. You will not be pinioned. But in return for this so great a favor on the part of the management of the Philadelphia Zoo, you are to give a free concert here at the lake every Sunday afternoon for the people of Philadelphia, the peasantry who come here to refresh themselves. Is it a deal? Yes, wrote Louis. We'll give Sunday concert. Okay, boys and girls, let's stop here. That was a lot to read. Okay, let's look back at this. Okay, so we have Mr. Lucky Lucas, right? His way of speaking almost reminds me of the Cobb. He's got big words. He kind of talks around in circles, though. It's like he has a lot of words to say, but not much meaning is coming out. Okay, so here's what he's saying. He says, okay, here's the deal. You get the job. He considers himself Louis's agent, which means that he got him the job. So he's going to take 10% of Louis's money. He kind of put that in here quickly. I don't know if Louis heard him say that. Okay. So then Louis talks to him about getting in the cab. Louis is very smart to ask him who's going to pay for the cab. He says he will. Then he offers to hold Louis's money bag. I wonder what you thought about that part. I remember when I first read that, I thought, oh no, Louis, don't do it. Don't let him have your money bag. But Louis just very politely, very smartly said, no, I think I'll hang on to my money. Thank you, though. He says, okay. Okay, so now here's the long part. Okay. He says, there's another matter that I need to bring to your attention. Here's the deal, boys and girls. This is like a tiny little lake in the middle of this zoo, okay? Well, lots of birds live on this lake, right? And the zoo wants the birds to stay there because the people enjoy seeing the birds and, you know, it's another animal for their zoo, stuff like that. So here's the deal. They do this little procedure on the birds, which Mr. Lucas called pinion, okay? And to pinion a bird means that they clip off a little tip of their wing. Now he said, I don't know anything about it. You know, I'm not a bird. I've never had my wing clipped. He says that it doesn't hurt. Okay. Why would they do that to these birds? Well, think about what we just read. It says that it prevents the birds from leaving this little pond, okay, because they want the birds to stay. If one wing is slightly shorter than the other wing, it messes up their takeoff and it messes up their flying. So it basically leaves them kind of stuck on this little pond. Mr. Lucas makes it seem like it's no big deal, but I don't think I would want to be stuck anywhere. And do you think Lewis is going to want to be stuck in Philadelphia when his family is either in Montana or sometimes they're in Canada? No way. He's definitely not going to want to be stuck there. So that would probably be a deal breaker for Lewis if he found out he was going to have his wing clipped, you know? So Mr. Lucas says, okay, well, here's the deal. I worked this out for you. And the guy said he won't clip your wing, which is great, but you're going to have to do a concert. And Lewis doesn't really care. He's like, okay, I'll do a concert. No problem. I guess to me, it's just kind of a big deal that they would have done that in the first place, you know? So I don't know. It just kind of makes my heart flutter a little bit like, oh man, that's kind of crazy. You know, Lewis just wants to come there and do a job to earn money and then get out of there. Last thing he wants is his wing clipped. So, okay. So if we go back, he says, is it a deal? And Lewis writes, yes, we'll give Sunday concert. So Lewis agrees to the deal. Good, said Mr. Lucas. Farewell for the nonce. Be at the north entrance at 9. October 15. A cab will await you. Play well, sweet Swan. You will be the finest thing that has happened to Philadelphia since the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Lewis didn't understand this, but he nodded goodbye to Mr. Lucas and he swam off toward the island in the center of the lake. There he stepped ashore, straightened his things, preened his feathers, and rested. He was not sure he was going to like this new job. He was not sure that he liked Mr. Lucas. But he needed the money badly, and when you need money, you're willing to put up with difficulties and uncertainties. One good thing about the whole business was the zoo itself. It seemed like an extremely nice place, despite what he had heard about having your wing clipped. Lewis had no intention of having his wing clipped. I'll sock anybody who tries that on me, he said to himself. He was pleased to see so many other water birds. There were many kinds of ducks and geese. In the distance, he saw 3 trumpeter swans. They were old residents of the lake. Their names were Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy. Lewis decided he would wait a day or two before making their acquaintance. Bird Lake had a fence around it. When the night came for him to start work, Lewis polished his trumpet, put on his things, flew over the fence, and landed at the north entrance. He was there promptly at 9. The taxicab was there, waiting, just as Mr. Lucas had promised. Lewis got in and was driven away to his new job. Chapter 17, Serena. During the next 10 weeks, Lewis got rich. He went every evening except Sunday to the nightclub and played his trumpet for the customers. He did not like the job at all. The place was big and crowded and noisy. Everyone seemed to be talking too loudly, eating too much, and drinking too much. Most birds like to go to sleep at sundown. They do not want to be up half of the night entertaining people. But Lewis was a musician, and musicians can't choose their working hours. They must work when their employer wants them to. Every Sunday night, Lewis collected his pay, $500. Mr. Lucas was always on hand to receive his agent's fee, which was 10% from Lewis. After Lewis had paid Mr. Lucas, he still had $450 left. He would put this in his money bag, hop into the waiting taxicab, and return to Bird Lake, arriving at about 3 a.m. His money bag grew so stuffed with money, Lewis was beginning to worry. On Sunday afternoons, if the weather was good, crowds of people would gather on the shores of Bird Lake, and Lewis would stand on the island in the middle of the lake and give a concert. This became a popular event in Philadelphia, where there wasn't much going on Sunday. Lewis took the concert very seriously. By playing for the people, he was earning the right to remain free and not have a wing clipped. He was always at his best on Sunday. Instead of playing jazz and rock and folk and country and western, he would play selections from the works of the great composers Ludwig van Beethoven, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Johann Sebastian Bach. Music he had learned by listening to records of Camp Kookooskoos. Lewis also liked the music of George Gershwin and Stephen Foster. When he played Summertime from Porgy and Bess, the people of Philadelphia felt it was the most thrilling music they had ever heard. Lewis was considered so good on the trumpet, he was invited to make a guest appearance with the Philadelphia Symphony Orchestra. One day, about a week before Christmas, a great storm came up. The sky grew dark. The wind blew a howling gale. It made a whining noise. Windows rattled, shutters came off their hinges, old newspapers and candy wrappers were picked up by the wind and scattered like confetti. Many of the creatures in the zoo became restless and uneasy. Over in the elephant house, the elephants trumpeted in alarm. Lions roared and paced back and forth. The great black cockatoo screamed. Keepers rushed here and there, shuttering doors and windows and making everything secure against the awful force of the gale. The waters of Bird Lake were ruffled by the strong, mighty wind, and for a while the lake looked like a small ocean. Many of the water birds sought protection on the island. Lewis rode out the gale on the lake in the lee of the island. He faced the wind and kept paddling with his feet, his eyes bright with wonder at the strength of the blast. Suddenly he saw an object in the sky. It was coming down out of the clouds. At first, he couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it's a flying saucer, he thought. Then he realized that it was a large white bird, struggling desperately to come in against the wind. Its wings were beating rapidly. In a moment, it splashed down and flopped ashore where it lay, sprawled out, almost as if it were dead. Lewis stared and stared and stared. Then he looked again. It looks like a swan, he thought. It was a swan. It looks like a trumpeter swan, he thought. It was a trumpeter swan. My goodness, Lewis said to himself. It looks like Serena. It is Serena. She's here at last. My prayers have been answered. Lewis was right. Serena, the swan of his desiring, had been caught by a fierce storm and blown all the way across America. When she looked down and saw Bird Lake, she ended her flight, almost dead from exhaustion. Lewis was tempted to rush right over, but then he thought, no, that would be a mistake. She is in no condition at the moment to perceive the depth of my affection and the extent of my love. She is too pooped. I will wait. I will bide my time. I will give her a chance to recover. Then I will renew our acquaintance and make myself known. So those were really fancy words to say she's really tired right now, so he's going to wait till the morning. Lewis did not go to his job that night. The weather was too bad. All night he stayed awake, keeping watch at a slight distance from his beloved. When morning came, the wind subsided. The skies cleared. The lake grew calm. The storm was over. Serena stirred and woke. She was still exhausted and very mussy. Lewis stayed away from her. I'll just wait, he thought. When in love, one must take risks. But I'm not going to risk everything with a bird who is too tired to see straight. I won't hurry. and I won't worry. Back home on Upper Red Rock Lake, I was without a voice. She ignored me because I could not tell her of my love. Now, thanks to my brave father, I have a trumpet. Through the power of music, I will impress her with the intensity of my desire and the strength of my devotion. She will hear me say, "Kaho!" I'll tell her I love her in a language anybody can understand, the language of music. She will hear the trumpet of the Swan, and she will be mine. At least, I hope she will. Usually, if a strange bird appeared on Bird Lake, one of the keepers would report its arrival to the head man in charge of the birds, whose office was in the birdhouse. The head man would then give the order to have the new bird pinioned, one of its wings clipped. But today, the keeper who usually tended the waterfowl was sick with the flu and had not come to work. Nobody noticed that a new trumpeter swan had arrived. Serena was being very quiet anyway. She was not attracting any attention. There were now 5 trumpeters on the lake. There were originally 3 captive swans: Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy. And there was, of course, Lewis. And now there was a new arrival, Serena, still exhausted but beginning to revive. Toward the end of the afternoon, Serena roused herself, looking at her surroundings, and had a bite to eat. Took a bath and then walked out of the water and stood for a long while preening her feathers. She felt distinctly better, and when her feathers were all smoothed out, she looked extremely beautiful, stately, serene, graceful, and very feminine. Lewis trembled when he saw how truly lovely she was. He was again tempted to swim over and say, "Kaho!" and see if she remembered him. But he had a better idea. There's no hurry, he thought. She's not going to leave Philadelphia tonight. I will go to my job, and when I get back from work, I shall abide near her all through the night. Just at daylight, I will awaken her with a song of love and desire. She will be drowsy. The sound of my trumpet will enter her sleepy brain and overcome her with emotion. My trumpet will be the first sound she hears. It will be irresistible. I will be the first thing she sees when she opens her eyes, and she will love me from that moment on. Lewis was well satisfied with his plan and began to make preparations. He swam ashore, removed his things, hid them under a bush, then returned to the water, where he fed and bathed. Then he fixed his feathers carefully. He wanted to look his best next morning, when the meeting was to take place. He drifted around for a while, thinking of all the songs that he liked and trying to decide which one to play to wake Serena in the morning. He finally decided to play Beautiful Dreamer, Wake Unto Me. He had always loved that song. It was sad and sweet. She will be a beautiful dreamer, thought Lewis, and she will wake unto me. The song fits the situation perfectly. He was determined to play the song better than he had ever played it before. It was one of his best numbers. He really knew how to play it awfully well. Once, when he had played it at one of his Sunday concerts, a music critic from the Philadelphia newspaper heard him. And the next morning, the newspaper said, some of his notes were like jewels held up to the light. The emotion he transmits is clean and pure and sustained. Lewis had memorized the statement. He was proud of it. Now he was anxious for morning to come, but he still had his job at the nightclub to go to. He knew the night would be long and that he wouldn't be able to sleep. Lewis swam ashore to pick up his things. When he looked under the bush, he received a terrible jolt. His medal was there. His slate and chalk pencil were there. His money bag was there. But where was the trumpet? His trumpet was gone. Poor Lewis, his heart almost stopped. Oh no, he said to himself. Oh no! Without his trumpet, his whole life would be ruined. All of his plans for the future would collapse. He was frantic with anger and fear and dismay. He dashed back into the water and looked up and down the lake. Far off, he saw a small wood duck that seemed to have something shiny in its mouth. It was the trumpet, all right. The duck was trying to play it. Lewis was furious. He skimmed down the lake, going even faster than he had the day he saved Applegate from drowning. He swam straight for that duck, knocked him on his head with a swift blow of his wing, and grabbed the precious trumpet. The duck fainted. Lewis wiped the horn, blew the spit out of it, and hung it around his neck where it belonged. Now he was ready. Let the night come. Let the hours pass. Let the morning come when my beautiful dreamer wakes unto me. Night came at last. 9 o'clock came. Lewis went off to work, riding in the cab. The zoo quieted down. The visitors had all gone home. Many of the animals slept or snoozed. A few of them, the great cats, the raccoon, the armadillo, the ones that enjoyed the nighttime, prowled and became restless. Bird Lake was clothed in darkness. Most of the waterfowl tucked their heads under their wings and slept. At one end of the lake, the 3 captive swans, Curiosity, Felicity, and Apathy, were already asleep. Near the island, Serena, the beautiful Serena, was fast asleep and dreaming. Her long white neck was folded neatly back. Her head rested on soft feathers. Lewis got home from work at 2 a.m. He flew over the low fence and splashed down near Serena, making as little noise as possible. He did not try to sleep. The night was fair and crisp, as nights often are just before Christmas. Clouds drifted across the sky in endless procession, partially hiding the stars. Lewis watched the clouds, watched Serena as she slept, and waited for the day to come, hour after hour after hour. At last, a faint light shone in the east. Soon the creatures would be stirring, and morning would be here. This is my moment, thought Lewis. The time has come for me to waken my true love. He placed himself directly in front of Serena. Then he raised the trumpet to his mouth, tilted his head. The horn pointed slightly upward toward the sky, where the first light was showing, and he began his song. Beautiful dreamer, he played, wake unto me. The first 3 or 4 notes were played softly. Then, as the song progressed, the sound increased. The light in the sky grew brighter. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. Starlight and dewdrops are waiting for thee. Each note was like a jewel held up to a light. The sound of Lewis's trumpet had never before been heard at this early dawn hour in the zoo. And the sound seemed to fill the whole world of buildings and animals and trees and shrubs and paths and dens and cages. Sleepy bears, dozing in their grotto, pricked up their ears. Foxes, hiding in their dens, listened to the sweet and dreamy sound of the horn blown at the coming of the light. In the lion house, the great cats heard. In the monkey house, the old baboon listened in wonder to the song. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. The hippo heard, and the seal in his tank. The gray wolf heard, and the yak in his cage. The badger, the coon, the ring-tailed coati, the skunk, the weasel, the otter, the llama, the dromedary, the white-tailed deer all heard, listened, and perked up their ears at the song. The kudu heard, and the rabbit. The beaver heard, and the snake, who has no ears. The wallaby, the possum, the anteater, the armadillo, the peafowl, the pigeon, the bowerbird, the cockatoo, the flamingo, all heard. All were aware that something out of the ordinary was happening. Philadelphians, waking from sleep in bedrooms where the windows were open, heard the trumpet. Not one person who heard the song realized that this was the moment of triumph for a young swan who had a speech defect and had conquered it. Lewis was not thinking about his large, unseen audience of animals and people. His mind was not on the bears and the buffaloes and the cassowaries and the lizards and hawks and owls and people in bedrooms. His mind was on Serena, the swan of his choice, the beautiful dreamer. He played for her and her alone. At the first note from his trumpet, she awoke. She raised her head and her neck straightened until her head was held high. What she saw filled her with astonishment. She gazed straight at Louis. At first, she could hardly remember where she was. Directly in front of her, she saw a handsome young male swan, a cob of noble proportions. Held against his mouth was a strange instrument, something she had never seen before. And from this strange instrument came sounds that made her tremble with joy and love. As the song went on and as the light grew stronger, she fell hopelessly in love with this bold trumpeter who had awakened her from her dreams. The dreams of night were gone. New dreams of day were upon her. She knew that she was full of sensations she had never had before, feelings of delight and ecstasy and wonder. She had never seen a finer looking young cob. She had certainly never seen any swan with so many personal possessions around his neck. And she had never been so thrilled by a sound before in her whole life. Oh, she thought, oh, oh, oh. The song ended. Louis lowered his trumpet and bowed solemnly to Serena. Then he raised his horn again. "Caho!" he said. "Caho!" replied Serena. "Caho! Caho!" said Louis through his trumpet. "Caho! Caho!" replied Serena. Each felt drawn to the other by a mysterious bond of affection. Louis swam once rapidly around Serena. Then Serena swam once rapidly around Louis. This seemed to amuse them. Louis dipped his neck and pumped it back and forth. Serena dipped her neck and pumped it back and forth. Louis splashed a little water into the air. Serena splashed a little water into the air. It was like a game. It was love at long last for Louis, and it was love at first sight for Serena. Then Louis decided to show off. I'll play her my own composition, he thought, the one I made up for her last summer at camp. He raised his trumpet. Oh, ever in the greening spring, by bank and bough retiring, for love shall I be sorrowing, and swans of my desiring. The notes were clear and pure. They filled the zoo with beauty. If Serena had been in any doubt before, she no longer was. She succumbed completely to this charmer, this handsome musician, this rich and talented cob. Louis knew that his plan had succeeded. His beautiful dreamer had wakened, and she had wakened unto him. Never again would they be parted. All the rest of their lives they would be together. Thoughts of small, quiet lakes in the woods where cane brakes grew and blackbirds sang filled Louis's mind. Thoughts of springtime and nesting and little cygnets, oh, ever in the greening spring. Louis had been told once by his father what happened to deep-sea divers when they go far, far down into the ocean. At great depths, where the pressure is great and the watery world is strange and mysterious, divers sometimes experience what they call rapture of the deep. They feel so peaceful and enchanted that they never want to return to the surface. Louis's father had warned him about this. Always remember, when you dive deep, he had said, that this feeling of rapture can lead you to your death. No matter how wonderful you feel down there, don't forget to return to the surface where you can breathe again. Looking at Serena, Louis thought to himself, I think love is like the rapture of the deep. I feel so good, I just want to stay right where I am. I'm experiencing rapture of the deep even though I'm right on the top of the water. I have never felt so good, so peaceful, so excited, so happy, so ambitious, so desirous. If love is like this on a cold day in December in the Philadelphia Zoo, imagine what it's going to be like in the spring on a remote lake in Canada. These were Lewis's secret thoughts. He was the happiest bird alive. He was a real trumpeter swan at last. His defect of being without a voice had at last been overcome. He felt very grateful to his father. Cautiously, he placed his head across Serena's beautiful white neck. It seemed a very daring thing to do, but she seemed to like it. Then he backed away. Serena swam toward him. Cautiously, she placed her head across his neck. It rested there for a moment, and then she swam away. What a daring thing, she thought, but he seems to like it. How pleasing to know that I have found an acceptable mate, a cob I can love and respect, a cob that appears to be not only musical, but also quite wealthy. Look at all those things, said Serena to herself. Her eyes feasted on the trumpet, the slate, the chalk pencil, the money bag, the life-saving medal. What a gay cob, she thought. What a dressy fellow. They swam off together toward the other end of the lake where they could be alone. Then Lewis, who was short on sleep, dozed off, while Serena ate her breakfast and fixed herself up. All right, boys and girls, go ahead and work on your comprehension questions.